Hey everybody, this is the Information War Report for March 2025, brought to you by the Media and Democracy Project. I am Brian, this is Milo. We are both two of the co-founders of the Media and Democracy Project, and we are ready to let you know some of the things that have happened in the information war over the last month. You can see here on the screen what the Media and Democracy Project is all about. We advocate and empower people to activate civically. That means supporting local and nonprofit journalism, especially in this time when corporate journalism is failing all of us. And we advance media literacy and engage in media criticism, and we try to achieve legislative and regulatory solutions to support better fact-based media in the public interest. Of course, we did not know that Mike Lukovich, the cartoonist, would be so prescient in creating this cartoon, The Gulf of America. The outcome of the 2024 election was decided by who was informed and who was not informed. Of course, obviously, we have different political beliefs and ideologies in this country, but it is overwhelmingly the case that if you knew more about the news and information and the state of the country, you voted for Harris, and if you knew less, you voted for Donald Trump. So what you know about the world and the information that you consume has everything to do with our outcomes in this country. So let's get right into it. We're doing actions first this month because really actions are the most important part of all of this. We're an action-based group that likes to get people motivated to increase the health and quality of our information ecosystem. So our first action, as always, is to consume, share, and support quality journalism. We have up here some screenshots of MAD's local journalism directory. You can go to our website, mediaanddemocracyproject.org, where you can search a 50-state plus U.S. territories database of over 2,000 nonprofit, independent media organizations and newsrooms that are reporting in the public interest. We believe that you should take your hard-earned money, if you are able, and support these news outlets if you can.
Emphasizing a lot of these are actually free, so you can poke around. There's definitely something in your neck of the woods, so feel free to explore and be a beacon of spreading this good information.
Another action we want you to take this month is to subscribe to someone who is writing and reporting in the public interest. This is media critic Mark Jacob, who is a former editor at the Chicago Tribune. His most recent piece is when the media take MAGA liars at their word. Whether it's cluelessness or complicity, it's toxic to democracy. Certainly politicians on both sides of the aisle lie, but obviously over the last several years with lying about elections, something so sacred and important to our democracy, there is a great imbalance there. And so, Milo, do you have anything else to say about Mark Jacob? He's been someone that we look to for lots of great critique of what's happening in media and corporate media.
Mark Jacob is one of those beacons of reality and advocate for fact-based journalism across the board, and we think it's important in these times of multiple assaults on our conscience and values to highlight and illustrate people we think are doing good work, and we should engage and elevate and support those people. So subscribe to his free Substack, chip in if you can. He's writing really spot-on and inspiring work.
Yeah, and follow him on his socials as well, once you go there and find out what his socials are. Okay, another action that we will basically always ask you to engage in is to refer to news organizations by their corporate parent, right? It matters the words we use to describe the world. It matters the words we use to describe people in power and people in media power. So we have a big list here. You know that Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post and that he has turned his organization towards the far right in this country. You know that Paramount is owned by CBS. You know that Murdoch owns Fox. So it's important to use these words so that we're not just allowing these corporate entities to give us narratives without us being aware that they are corporate narratives. Right, Milo?
Absolutely. It's important to emphasize that a corporate agenda is not necessarily synonymous with a democracy agenda. And so when you engage in discussing the corporate parents, you bring into any conversation that they're likely sometimes conflicting agendas. And we're seeing that in the last 2 months with a different administration, that the corporate parents have very different interests than the news org subsidiaries. We saw that with the settlement of Disney, with the George Stephanopoulos ABC News. We see ongoing questions of what CBS is going to do, but its corporate parent is really Paramount, who has a lot of business in front of the FCC. Bringing into any conversation media ownership really gives additional insight and context to any conversation.
As always, defend press freedom in 2025. You know, that's a hashtag that we use with our socials. So if you ever want to check in on the state of press freedom, we have an ongoing Blue Sky thread that's incredible. Definitely check out our blog where we're posting about these issues of press freedom all the time. Donald Trump has been attacking the press, which is what every authoritarian does when they want to exert control and get people to not trust reporting about their corruption, their misdeeds, their betrayal. So it's very important that we defend the press, which is the only profession that is enshrined into our Constitution. So definitely up your defense of press freedom in 2025.
And another way to do that, Brian, is there are organizations such as the Freedom to Protect Journalists and several others. There are organizations that support and give legal services to help defend press freedom with actions as well. And just as an aside, Brian, just as we think about their people expressing their First Amendment rights, I did come across an individual that I saw had a sign held up that basically said hashtag press freedom. So as people start thinking of causes, as they start to get to demonstrate their values, defending press freedom is something we can do visually as well.
Yeah. If you want Milo and I to think you're really cool, make a sign that says hashtag press freedom. So speaking of that First Amendment that is so often in the news these days, here's the First Amendment here. And why it's so important is because we are at a time where we should be, as we said, defending the press, but we should be defending our own right to speak our own words in this country without the government saying that we are not allowed, and without the government possibly imprisoning us or taking away our rights simply for expressing our right to free speech. Because we think another action that you should be taking is guerrilla messaging, and you should be allowed to peaceably assemble on an overpass and give a brief message uplifting democracy.
We know that the founders were brilliant in many ways, and they recognized that a democracy without the ability to share information and express opinions and ideas was going to be a failed democracy and not succeed. And I think it's time to brush up on some of those amendments and the importance of them. This group is a group in Jersey who's taken to expressing their First Amendment rights, peacefully assembling and demonstrating their messaging to people under an overpass with some basic messaging.
On to our next action, but this is really an announcement of something that we will be doing in about 2 weeks' time. This is our Mad Media Writers Workshop. And so, Milo, do you want to tell folks a little bit about this?
Absolutely. We want people to feel confident and comfortable writing letters to the editor, a form of self-expression where you engage with news outlets, media orgs. And also something that we find very satisfying over the years is to do outreach to journalists directly. Journalists, by definition, need to communicate, have sources, and hear from people. So they're very actually willing to engage with people who engage them in good faith. And one of the things we really like to do is say thank you. As part of defending a free press, it's also supporting journalists who are doing excellent work. And we'll talk a little bit about strategies of how you engage a journalist and say, listen, I read this piece. It was great. Thanks for doing the work you're doing. And it's some goodwill towards the journalists who need more goodwill as they are under attack from multiple fronts these days. So this is an opportunity to learn from some of the people in our community who've taught about letter writing to the editors. That's April 3rd, 8 p.m. Eastern time. It'll be via Zoom, and we'll share some ideas and strategies.
Okay, so we've made it pretty easy for you. Tiny.cc, mad-mmww. You can also find our Mobilize, and you can find it that way as well. So let's get right into the information war report, the meat of it. How are American minds fed, by whom and why? And the true battle for hearts and minds and democracy is an information war, and we are in the thick of it. So let's get right into it. So the news is growing ever more MAGA, and you know, it's great for news to express a diversity of the ideological viewpoints in this country. Unfortunately, the MAGA movement has proven itself to be an extreme one, lifting up vigilantes, lying about elections, attempting coups, both physical and administrative, and you know, if you care about democracy, regardless of your political ideology, those things are pretty intense. And we want to be wary when our media outlets are also starting to side with the forces of extremism in our country. Milo, this is a Wall Street Journal opinion piece that is talking about Jeff Bezos's ideological turn towards the right that he is directing the Washington Post towards. Jeff Bezos, of course, the owner of both Amazon and the Washington Post. And so we can see over here on the right that they are saying we welcome the intellectual company, but they say at the very bottom, we'll see if Mr. Bezos' turn signals a larger change in the battle of ideas, but it will be good to have a wingman in the fight. And so I think there's no more obvious admission that the news is getting ever more towards the MAGA extreme right.
Agreed. Just the dots that we saw that unfortunately not enough folks processed at the time was Jeff Bezos did make a former Murdoch henchman, Sir Will Lewis, the publisher last year. That was a really sentinel sign of where things were going. Then the Will Lewis and the editorial board stepping on a presidential endorsement at the last minute, contrary to the newsroom and editorial board itself. Then the stepping on the editorial cartoonist of Antelnes, a Pulitzer Prize-winning, brilliant editorial cartoonist. And then we'll talk a little bit more about Ruth Marcus and the fleeing of this once great institution that played a central role in informing elites in this country.
Okay, so day of infamy, Trump declares himself king. There's a lot to unpack here. What we see on the screen is that Elon Musk is retweeting Donald Trump's tweet from the middle of February saying he who saves his country does not violate any law. And then we also see Jack Posobiec also getting involved in communication in public on social media with Elon Musk, boosting up this idea. Now, for Jack Posobiec's role in this, he has appeared on stages with Steve Bannon talking about how they are there to destroy democracy. Elon Musk is obviously a top disinformer in the world and spreader of hate and disinformation. There are specifically 14 American flags here used by Elon Musk. He often is teasing and playing around, which is really nothing to play around with, this idea of the number 14, which is a reference to a white supremacist motto. The phrase that Donald Trump uses, he who saves his country does not violate any law, is a phrase that is attributed to Napoleon Bonaparte. It is also attributed to Anders Breivik, the mass shooter who killed over 70 people several years ago, and he made a similar claim in his manifesto. So, you know, how often was that reported to people in their major sources of information and their mainstream press? Milo, the president declaring himself basically a king.
Yes, I think this goes down in journalistic and editorial infamy as, sure, Donald Trump says many things and you can't write or cover all of them, but I think it's useful to think of, are there no red lines? Is nothing sacred? I can't help these days thinking of that famous phrase from the McCarthy era, have you no sense of decency? Brian, I want to get your feedback if we have time on a phrase I think that I'm trying to workshop, democracy washing. Like we're kind of pretending that this is democracy. When somebody declares themselves king and the richest man in the world is gutting our government and really sabotaging the way our system of our entire society is, we're democracy washing that. Is this democracy anymore or what is the red line when we stop doing this?
I mean, I love that. I'm actually like pulling up this very recent Washington Post headline, which is absolutely democracy washing. It takes this person who declared himself king in the middle of February, and it boosts his plans for the economy, which are really just plans to destroy the economy. The Washington Post headline is Trump has a plan to remake the economy, but he's not explaining it very well. President Donald Trump's economic plan is causing brief pain. There's no quotes around that. They're saying that it's causing brief pain while the nation advances to a new golden age. Okay, there's quotes around golden age, but they're really just ignoring these lines that are being crossed and democracy washing. They're treating Donald Trump still to this moment as normal, when none of this is normal. Okay.
At long last, have you no decency, editorial boards, journalists, stop making this seem normal to your readers. Please.
Yeah, please. How was this covered for you in your outlets? I did a bunch of research on this crypto strategic reserve. There were many credulous pieces written in, our mainstream media, like, NBC News, CNN, CBS, the New York Times. They may run other articles about this that maybe there's an opinion piece that says, like, this is a bad idea. Crypto is a completely speculative asset. When a country has a strategic reserve of something, there is a key word there called strategy. So when we have a strategic oil reserve, it is because things could go wrong globally and we want to protect our citizens and our strength as a country. So we have a giant stockpile of oil, and there's value to that. There is no value inherent to Bitcoin. Its value is simply the result of people speculating on it. What's happening is that when the government creates a strategic Bitcoin reserve, they take all of our tax dollars, 350 billion, I think is the proposed number, and they invest it in Bitcoin, which has no value. It's taking our money and giving it to the wealthy people who own Bitcoin and who own other coins, I guess, right?
I don't think there's any credible economics minds that are saying that this is a worthwhile investment for the United States of America. And unfortunately, those experts don't get quoted or their opinions included in this discussion. It's a scam, and then it's also now we're nationalizing the scam. And that's not being covered because it's ultimately a threat to all of us. You can imagine what $350 billion might actually do for American society, schools, roads, taxpayers, veterans, etc.
It could end homelessness many times over. So, mad heroes and zeros. Let's get into it. Our mad hero of the month is Ruth Marcus.
One of the things that we do in MAD is we support local news outlets. We support independent nonprofit journalists. There are journalists making decisions every day to continue what they write about and who they work for. And it's not easy when you've spent 30, 40, 50 years in an institution like Ruth Marcus has. She's an institution in an institution. And she's an apolitical, very thoughtful writer, has been for a long time. And she's seen the direction that Jeff Bezos has directed Sir Will Lewis to take the Washington Post over the last year. She's seen multiple warnings, and it's worth reading her piece. I think this is both a media story to explain what's wrong with the Washington Post and, frankly, media writ large. This is the influence of a media owner. I think there's a second story which speaks to all of us and individuals as we become put in circumstances where we have to make decisions of do we obey in advance, and those concepts are beginning. Those used to be far over the horizon and those kind of questions, but they're becoming more and more apparent for people who work in government agencies, for people who work in institutions such as universities. How do we obey the institutional bending by the powers that be? And so I think there's a story for all of us to read Ruth Marcus's piece on white.
These are still the places that are breaking major stories. These are still the places that, for all of their faults, have, quality journalists who are still remaining, the Washington Post and the New York Times. These are still the places where the news that we see on social media, the news that we talk about with our friends and family, is originating from these places. And they still matter deeply to our understanding of what's happening in America. And so it's really important when we see these journalists protesting, leaving in protest, announcing to all of us that something is off with our information ecosystem. Something is off with these institutions that have storied histories, in the case of the Washington Post, of standing up for democracy, of deeply impacting with their reporting the outcomes of the presidency, in the case of Richard Nixon. So this stuff matters, and Ruth Marcus's principled decision and the decision to tell everyone about it is important. And so she is our mad hero of the month of March 2025. And don't get us even started on the mad zero. Gavin Newsom made the decision to platform known liars and white supremacists, to platform some of the biggest disinformers in this country. Here we see Charlie Kirk, Gavin Newsom's first podcast guest. Charlie Kirk is giving the white power symbol. And so Gavin Newsom had Charlie Kirk on the first episode of his show. He's chuckling. He's being like, my son loves you. Charlie Kirk is a billionaire wrapped in a Charlie Kirk flesh suit. When Charlie Kirk speaks, it is the billionaires who gave him the seed money and the billionaires who continue to give money to Talking Point USA to sustain their program of having him. It's just like we just talked about with the Washington Post. Jeff Bezos is speaking his agenda, just like how we started the program. All of these media owners are speaking their agendas through the media that they own. Well, Charlie Kirk is a piece of media that other oligarchs own. And Gavin Newsom is giving him a platform.
Information war is definitely a broad-based, bipartisan problem here. We in the Media and Democracy Project are nonpartisan. We're not Democrats or Republicans. We care about the information of our fellow Americans, whether they be Republican, Democratic, or somewhere in between, or even
Libertarian.
Exactly. Across, well, I don't know.
Green Party.
The idea being is that this is the Democratic governor of, I think, the large, I don't know, is it one of the large, I don't know, is Texas or California? Pardon my ignorance. Which one is the biggest, most populous state? So I think California.
Well, I know it's like the fifth largest economy in the world.
So we've got to question his judgment that he thinks platforming white supremacists is normal. This is really dangerous stuff. This would have been a scandal 10 years ago that the sitting governor of a major populous state would sit down with an avowed white supremacist who's undermined public health, has undermined civil rights across the board, and make it seem like we're just going to have a beer and talk about stuff on a podcast. That would have been really been a new low, but now we're unfortunately clicking off new lows. So
people push back on the platforming argument that people like you and I would make, but that attitude that like platforming is no big problem, and of course we should hear the ideas of others, that's like saying we should keep Citizens United, right? Most Americans don't want Citizens United. They don't want dark money impacting their democracy. This is a form of dark money impacting your democracy. This is not, Charlie Kirk isn't just some guy who rose to fame without subsidization by dark money. Right. So like that's kind of why it's a big problem.
Yeah, it would have been great, Brian, if the governor of California interviewed you to talk about democracy and if you don't think platforming matters, what would that have done for the Media and Democracy Project that Gavin Newsom's first guest was Brian Hansberry?
Right. Overnight, we'd have legitimately, like overnight, we'd have 100,000 more followers. People would think things about us. They would think whether they care or not, or like Gavin Newsom or not, they would be legitimacy added to our group that would not be there before. And so we're not white supremacists. So maybe it's okay to legitimize us. We'll stand firm on our stance here that it's not okay to legitimize white supremacy at the Media and Democracy Project. Okay, let's move on to the language of our times. Tune into the novel language of our times. What media word choices could use more precision? Many are double-edged swords. They highlight concerns, but in a weak way. And they normalize the acceptance of this war on democracy that we've been talking about this war on democracy for years. And now it's much more real. Neither of us is gloating about it. We wish that it wasn't made so real. We wish people still were like, you guys are complaining about the media too much. We wish that was the case. But word choices matter. Frames matter. Everything matters. We are being tricked and manipulated as a nation into voting against all of our best interests, as we are seeing every single day. And the Americans who don't believe that are susceptible to weaponized disinformation in this very moment. So is someone exploiting the new language, and is someone defining the frames for us without our ability to have any say about them? So the language of our times for this month of March 2025 is administrative coup. Once again, dodgy, and it is competitive authoritarianism. You can see on the screen some of the others that we have had in the past. For the last 2 months, it has also been dodgy. In December, it was obeying in advance. I went to a protest recently where I saw a sign, "Do not obey in advance." So that is still something that people are talking about. And so let's just get into a little bit. We don't normally do this with language of our times, but we want to talk about these too. So call it an administrative coup. And so we have several points up here on the screen about what it means for this to be an administrative coup, the illegal firings of government watchdogs, right? The actual people and agencies that were already in place to discover fraud, waste, and abuse were eliminated by people who have business before the government, who are being regulated by the government. The seizure of over $3 trillion of our funds in federal funding, the federal freeze, the unconstitutional attempt to end birthright citizenship, suing media and companies to get them to comply and give Donald Trump and Elon Musk money, the overt intimidation of government workers and asking for loyalty, the legal but terrifying pardoning of violent insurrectionists, the first time any sitting president has freed thugs who helped them seize power. Milo, what do you have to say about the term administrative coup, and that we should all be using that phrase as often as possible?
We all need vocabulary. No one's ever lived what we're living. That's an obvious statement. It's like an obvious but not obvious sentence. I mean, so we need new vocabulary. We don't know what's happening and how to describe it. Historians are giving us great context. So historians would use this term, and so we should all better understand this. This isn't Elon Musk and a power sharing agreement. This is actually an administrative coup. And that frames it as something that's bad.
Another term for the language of our times for this month is competitive authoritarianism. This is a concept in political science that has been developed by Stephen Levitsky, and I think his name is Luchan or Lacan way. They've been developing it since the early 2000s. It is basically the coexistence of meaningful democratic institutions, while the president gives this idea of electoral competition in the face of the reality that it is actually unfair. This is basically what has been going on in places like Russia for the last couple of decades under Vladimir Putin. This idea that we have authoritarianism, but not in the traditional sense like we think of when we watch the History Channel, right? It has this aura, this air of still being a democracy in some sort of way. But we're already seeing Donald Trump and Steve Bannon joke or not joke about how Donald Trump will run for president again in 2028, right? And if that were the case, that would be a prime example of living under competitive authoritarianism.
I think it's, once again, a very useful term. We developed the vocabulary to help us better understand what's actually happening, and we're using historians to help us see. Right now, I think the historians are kind of democracy forecasters. Like, where are we heading, and what's happening? And I think Ruth Ben-Ghiat and Jason Stanley and Snyder and Heather Koch Richardson, people who are watching and listening to the work that they produce, are getting the best context for what's going on. And it's unfortunate that all of them are relegated primarily to Substacks and are not really breaking into corporate media. And I think that speaks to the problem of having such a dominant ecosystem controlled by corporate media, that they're going to be less likely to platform those very important democracy forecasters.
Absolutely. Democracy forecasters is a great way of putting it. I mean, to flip it to a negative frame, I would say canaries in the coal mine. I do see sometimes on mainstream media, Timothy Snyder and Ruth Ben-Ghiat being invited on sometimes. But really, based on what's happening in our world, if we had a in the public interest system of informing the public, you would have these experts on all the time talking about these crossing of all of the red lines. And so it does happen, but it's not happening with nearly the prominence and frequency that is required based on the crisis that we are currently in.
The term constitutional crisis has only been in a New York Times headline once in the last month. I just wanted to emphasize that. So in this interval, there's been one headline, just in case, for those of you who think there might be a constitutional crisis, which all credible constitutional scholars and historians do. The New York Times is still kind of a bit hedging its bets.
Moving on to should be front page, but isn't. We save the dessert for dessert time, traditional dessert time at the end of the program. This is for March 2025. Here we go. We have A. Carney reviews Canada's order of F-35 jets amid rift with U.S. Milo, what do you have to say about that?
So multiple American allies spend probably on the order of several $100 billion a year on military hardware, which is a significant part of the American industrial economy. Given the inconsistency and the threats to international collaboration, NATO, and the ability to rely on America as a military partner and trade partner, multiple allies and NATO members are now questioning whether they're going to fully purchase significant amount of military hardware, including some of the latest fighter jets produced by the American military industrial complex. Portugal and Canada have begun this question. And one of the things that's most disturbing is that they specifically cite that they are not sure that they can trust that the electronic hardware that they purchase will actually be supported and not interfered with at the whims of an American president or the American government in the future.
Or a completely unfit Secretary of Defense and the crony chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that they installed. Moving on to B, Trump's silencing of Voice of America sparks shock and outrage. Milo, we know that there is so much fodder on the disinformation right about Voice of America. Obviously, there's plenty to unpack about Voice of America over the decades, but at its core, it is an organization of journalists with a firewall between them and the government who have been trying to spread the ideals of democracy to other nations where, yes, certainly in the history of American imperialism, we have some responsibility for the situations that those countries are in. But at the end of the day, this is a good thing for America that has been destroyed by Donald Trump. Take it away.
And a good thing, frankly, is a countervailing voice to propaganda in North Korea and Russia around the world. So definitely not without its harms, potentially historically, in its own version of propaganda. But the idea that journalists, 1,300 of them, are let go at the click of a pen is really a not just a threat to free speech, but an attack on free speech.
The click of an auto pen, perhaps? Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Too soon.
So C, Elon Musk and Mike Lee having a great time on Twitter talking about how the United States should leave NATO.
One of the reasons that there has been safety in at least Northern Europe since the Second World War was an alliance called NATO, and the United States was nominally the head of that until 2 months ago. It is a super unreported story. It's basically a catastrophic failure of defense of the United States to undermine NATO. And here we have Elon Musk, co-president / president-in-chief. I don't know how we make the hierarchy, specifically, overtly saying that the United States should no longer be in NATO. This should have been a bridge too far for news organizations, editorial boards, that America should be withdrawn by a U.S. senator, should withdraw from NATO stated explicitly by a U.S. senator, and the co-president is terrifying.
Absolutely. D, Startup Nation. Groups say they're meeting Trump officials to push for deregulated freedom cities. This one is something people are probably like, what? What do all those words together mean?
This is a tough one to wrap your head around. But basically, many of the oligarchs who made sure that Donald Trump won the last election, including Elon Musk and some of his allies, they consider any oversight, regulatory, civil rights, economic, environmental regulations the bane of their existence and threat to their freedoms. So they euphemistically want to create freedom cities in the United States that are basically sovereign territory, independent from any government oversight. Imagine how great it would be to live there and work there as an employee or a serf or a slave or however it goes.
Yeah. Are any of these being reported with the frequency and prominence that the weight of their impact on all of us and our lives? Are these things being covered with the force that they require? And then so the last one, E, give us back the Statue of Liberty. We gave it to you as a gift, but apparently you despise it, so it will be just fine here at home, says French legislative body member Raphael Glucksmann to the USA. This one, more so than anything, just an indication, like some of these other headlines and stories, of the remaking of the world order that is going on before our eyes. And, I think that the headline should be every day, world order being remade, and so, that's sort of what this one speaks to, right, Milo?
Absolutely. It's also, it's cheeky on one sense, but it also is very real. And even if you were going to be a meek New York Times editor, front page design editor, you could put this on the front page, because it is a bit jarring that France elected official saying that they would like the Statue of Liberty back. That's another gentle way of saying this is not normal times, people.
100%. This should be front page, but isn't, for March 2025. The winner was B. You should come to one of our meetings, and when we are there, we all vote on these, and our group, which obviously cares very much about journalists, chose B as the winner. In second place was C, the calling for the end of NATO by a sitting U.S. senator and the de facto president of our country. Oh my God. And D, that these tech bro accelerationists want to create their own New Zealand bunkers in the United States confines. And if you don't know what I'm talking about with New Zealand bunkers, look that up, because that's another crazy story. So that brings us to the end of the Information War Report for March 2025. We hope that you have learned a little something here. We hope that you have been inspired to defend press freedom for the entire rest of the year and your entire life. And we want you to come to one of our meetings. You can go to mediaanddemocracyproject.org and sign up for one of our meetings. We hold them once a month. So we'll see you next April when you sign up. We talk about all of these issues and more. We take actions, and we would love to see you there. Our numbers are growing. Americans are starting to understand the deep connection between how we are informed and what our outcomes are as a nation. People are starting to understand how important our information ecosystem is, and we want you to come along on this journey with us, understanding these issues and taking action to make a better informed electorate in this country. Milo,
absolutely,
what you got?
Absolutely. I think my summary is just make sure you take some mental space for yourself. Don't overconsume information. There is a lot going on. It'll be there for you the next day. Limit social media. And when you do make choices of what you do choose to read, because there's an excessive amount of information out there, make sure that your media diet matches your values.
And how will you share fact-based information that aligns with your values today, tomorrow, and the next day? Because we are all, unfortunately, conscripted into this information war, whether we like it or not. And for the last 10 years, we've kind of been sitting on our hands just in a trench as the weaponized information is shot all over the place, all over the country, and we're seeing the results of it. So we can't wait to see you at a meeting, and we'll see you next month.